They say blood is thicker than water, but what happens when that blood turns poisonous? My name is Sarah, and for 67 years, I believed family meant everything. I spent my entire life putting my 3 brothers first, sacrificing my dreams, my money, even my marriage at times to keep them afloat. But the day I found that recording on my phone, the day I heard them plotting to steal everything I had left, I realized that sometimes the people who share your blood can be the ones who bleed you dry. The morning it all changed started like any other Tuesday in my small kitchen in Memphis, Tennessee. The October sun was filtering through my yellow curtains, the same ones I'd hung when Robert and I first bought this house 42 years ago. I was sitting at my little round table, the one with the worn wood finish that showed every ring from countless coffee cups, trying to make sense of numbers that never seemed to add up anymore. My pension statement was spread out in front of me like a puzzle I couldn't solve. $300 less than last month. Again, I picked up my reading glasses, the cheap drugstore kind because I couldn't afford the prescription ones anymore, and squinted at the fine print. How is this possible? I whispered to the empty room. My voice sounded strange in the silence, raspier than it used to be. At 67, I was talking to myself more often than I cared to admit. The house had been too quiet since Robert passed 3 years ago, and sometimes I needed to hear a voice, even if it was just my own. The phone rang, sharp and demanding. I glanced at the caller ID. Marcus, my oldest brother, the successful one, the one who wore $1,000 suits to family dinners, just to remind us all how well he'd done for himself. Good morning, Marcus, I said, trying to inject some cheer into my voice. With my brothers, I'd learned long ago that tone was everything. Sarah, we need to talk. His voice had that business, like quality that always made my stomach clench. David and James are coming over this afternoon. We're having a family meeting. A family meeting. Those 3 words had never meant anything good in the Carter household. The last time we'd had a family meeting, they'd convinced me to co-sign a loan for James's failed restaurant. Before that, it was David's second mortgage after his divorce. And before that, well, there was always something. What about? I asked, though I already knew better than to expect a straight answer. We'll discuss it when we get there. 2 o'clock. Make sure you have all your financial papers ready. The line went dead before I could respond. That was Marcus, efficient, cold, always in control. I stared at the phone for a moment, that familiar knot forming in my chest. In all my years of teaching elementary school, I'd never met children as demanding as my grown brothers. I spent the next few hours cleaning a house that was already spotless, baking cookies that probably wouldn't get eaten, and arranging my financial documents in neat piles on the dining room table. It was amazing how little there was to organize these days. Robert's life insurance had seemed like so much money when he first passed, but 3 years of family emergencies had whittled it down to almost nothing. At exactly 2 o'clock, I heard Marcus's BMW pull into my driveway, followed by the rumble of David's old pickup truck and the distinct sound of James's motorcycle. My heart started racing the way it always did when all 3 of them were together. Separately, they were manageable. Together, they were a force I'd never learned how to stand against. Marcus came through the front door without knocking. He'd stopped asking permission to enter my home years ago. He was dressed in his usual armor, a crisp navy suit, gold watch gleaming, silver hair perfectly styled. At 72, he was still an imposing man, tall and broad-shouldered like our father had been. David followed behind him, looking rumpled and bitter as always. His clothes hung loose on his thin frame, and his gray hair needed a trim. The divorce had been hard on him, but that was 5 years ago now. At some point, I'd stopped feeling sorry for him and started feeling tired of hearing about it. James brought up the rear, and despite everything, I felt that familiar flutter of affection. The baby of the family at 68, he still had that boyish charm that had gotten him out of trouble his whole life. His smile could light up a room, and he knew it. He was the only one who bothered to hug me when he walked in. "Sarah, sweetheart," he said, squeezing me tight. "You look wonderful." "Doesn't she look wonderful, guys?" Marcus grunted something noncommittal, while David helped himself to coffee without asking. They settled into my living room like they owned it. Marcus in Robert's old recliner, David sprawled across my couch, James perched on the arm of my chair like we were all just having a casual chat. "So," Marcus began, pulling out a leather portfolio that looked more expensive than my car, "we need to discuss your situation." "My situation?" I echoed, feeling that old defensive reflex kick in. "Sarah, honey," James said, his voice dripping with false concern, "we're worried about you. Living here all alone, managing all these finances by yourself. It's a lot for anyone, especially at your age. At my age. The words stung more than they should have. 67 wasn't ancient, but the way they said it made me feel like I was already 1 foot in the grave. David leaned forward, his face serious. We think it might be time to consider alternatives. What kind of alternatives? My voice came out smaller than I intended. Marcus opened his portfolio and pulled out a thick stack of papers. We've been doing some research. There are some very nice assisted living facilities in the area. Places where you wouldn't have to worry about maintaining this big house, managing bills, making financial decisions. The room seemed to tilt. Assisted living, but I'm fine here. I've been managing just fine. Have you though? David asked, and there was something almost cruel in his tone. Sarah, your pension keeps getting smaller. You're behind on property taxes. When's the last time you had the roof repaired? Or the furnace serviced? I opened my mouth to argue, but he wasn't wrong. The house did need work. The pension was shrinking, but that wasn't because I couldn't manage. It was because every time one of them called with an emergency, I found a way to help. Look at these numbers, Marcus said, sliding a paper across to me. It was a breakdown of my finances, detailed and accurate and absolutely humiliating. How did he even get this information? We're not trying to hurt you, James said softly, covering my hand with his. We love you. You took care of us our whole lives, and now it's our turn to take care of you. The words should have been comforting, but something about the way he said them made my skin crawl. There was a script here, I realized. They'd practiced this conversation. I don't need to be taken care of, I said, trying to summon some of the authority I'd used in my classroom for 35 years. I'm perfectly capable of. Are you? David interrupted. Because last month you asked me the same question 3 times in one phone call. And you've been getting confused about dates, forgetting appointments. My cheeks burned. I had been a little scattered lately, but that was normal grief, wasn't it? The kind of fog that settles over you when you've lost the person who was your anchor for 4 decades. Everyone forgets things sometimes. I said weakly, this is different. Marcus said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he'd perfected in boardrooms. Sarah, we've talked to some professionals. Early-stage dementia often presents as simple forgetfulness at first. Dementia. The word hit me like a physical blow. I don't have dementia. Of course not, James said quickly, squeezing my hand. But we want to make sure you're protected before things get worse. These facilities, they have medical staff activities, people your own age. You'd be happier there. I'm happy here, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I wondered if they were true. When was the last time I'd been genuinely happy? When was the last time I'd done something just for myself? Think about it, Marcus said, gathering his papers. We're not trying to rush you, but the good places have waiting lists. We need to get your name on them now. They stayed for another hour, eating my cookies, drinking my coffee, talking about me like I wasn't in the room. They discussed my deteriorating mental state, and my own ability to maintain the property, and the financial burden I was becoming. By the time they left, I felt hollowed out, like they'd reached inside me and scooped away everything I thought I knew about myself. That evening, I sat in my kitchen as the sun set, staring at the brochures they'd left behind. Sunset Manor, Golden Years Living, Happy Valley Senior Community. The names all sounded so cheerful, but the pictures showed the truth: hallways full of wheelchairs, activities rooms where elderly people sat in circles looking lost, dining halls that looked more like hospitals than homes. I picked up my phone to call my friend Margaret, then remembered she'd moved to Florida to live with her daughter 6 months ago. I thought about calling my old teaching colleague Beth, but she'd been dealing with her own health issues lately. One by one, I went through my mental list of people I could talk to, and one by one, I realized how small that list had become. When had I become so alone? I was getting ready for bed when I noticed the little red light on my phone blinking. A voice message. Probably one of my brothers with some follow-up thought about our discussion. I almost didn't listen to it. But something made me press play. What I heard changed everything. It was James's voice, but he wasn't talking to me. The message had apparently been left by accident. A pocket dial, maybe, or a phone that hadn't hung up properly. But it was clearly James, and he was talking to someone else. Marcus, I realized after a moment, she's more out of it than I thought. James was saying. Did you see how confused she got about the tax thing? This is going to be easier than we planned. Don't get overconfident. Marcus's voice replied. She's not stupid. Just grieving and isolated. There's a difference. Either way, once we get her into one of those places, we can handle everything else. The house, the insurance money, all of it. She'll never know what happened. My hand started shaking. What about the will? That was David's voice. He was there too. All three of them, somewhere, planning. What exactly? I've got a guy who can handle that, Marcus said. Medical incompetence, power of attorney, the whole thing. By the time we're done, she'll be grateful we took such good care of her assets. They all laughed, actually laughed. The message ended, and I sat there in my dark kitchen, staring at my phone like it had turned into a snake. My own brothers. The boys I'd raised when our mother got sick. The men I'd bailed out of trouble, lent money to, sacrificed for. They were planning to steal everything I had left, and they thought I was too weak, too confused, too broken to stop them. Maybe I was. But for the first time in 3 years, since Robert died and left me floating in this sea of loneliness and self-doubt, I felt something other than sadness. I felt angry. And anger, I was about to learn, was exactly what I needed. Thursday morning, I woke up with purpose for the first time in months. I had a plan, or at least the beginning of one. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was fighting for. After breakfast, I spread every financial document I owned across my dining room table. Bank statements, investment accounts, insurance policies, the deed to my house. Everything my brothers were so eager to help me manage. I hadn't looked at most of these papers since Robert died, too overwhelmed by grief and the complexity of finances I'd never had to handle alone. But as I studied each document, I realized something that should have been obvious. I wasn't nearly as helpless as they'd made me believe. Yes, my pension had decreased, because I'd been withdrawing from my supplemental retirement account to cover their emergencies. Yes, I was behind on property taxes, because I'd lent David $5,000 last spring for what he claimed was a medical expense. And yes, the house needed repairs, because I'd given Marcus $8,000 for James's restaurant equipment, money I'd planned to use for a new roof. In 3 years, I'd given them over $40,000, nearly half of Robert's life insurance settlement. I sat back in my chair, staring at the numbers I'd written in my notebook. $40,000, money that Robert had worked overtime shifts at the factory to provide, insurance he'd faithfully paid premiums on for 25 years so that I'd be secure after he was gone. And I'd handed it over to grown men who'd never once said thank you. My hands were shaking with anger as I called the first number Elena had given me. Adult Protective Services. I'd like to speak with someone about financial elder abuse, I told the receptionist, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. 20 minutes later, I was talking to a caseworker named Patricia Williams. No relation to Pastor Williams, she assured me with a laugh. She had a kind voice and the patience to walk me through what felt like hundreds of questions about my situation. Mrs. Carter, she said when I finished describing the past 3 years. What you're telling me represents a clear pattern of financial exploitation. The fact that they're now discussing having you declared incompetent while planning to take control of your remaining assets, that's actually criminal. Criminal. I hadn't thought about it in those terms, but she was right. What happens now? I asked. First, I'm going to open a case file. I'll need copies of that recording and any other documentation you have. Second, I'm going to connect you with our legal advocate. And third, I'm going to recommend that you take immediate steps to protect your assets. She gave me specific instructions: contact my bank to put alerts on my accounts, notify them that I was concerned about financial exploitation, and under no circumstances should I sign any documents without having them reviewed by an independent attorney. One more thing. Patricia said, do you have somewhere safe you could stay if things escalate? Sometimes when families realize they're losing control, they become more aggressive. The question caught me off guard. Safe? I'd lived in this house for 42 years. It had always been my sanctuary. But thinking about Marcus letting himself in without knocking, about James's practice manipulation, about David's bitter accusations, I'm not sure, I admitted. Think about it, she said. Family members, friends, anyone who could provide temporary shelter if needed. And Mrs. Carter, don't underestimate the value of what you're doing. It takes tremendous courage to stand up to family members, especially when they've conditioned you to doubt yourself. After we hung up, I made another call, this time to First Tennessee Bank, where I'd done my banking for 30 years. I asked to speak with the branch manager, Mrs. Chen, who'd helped me navigate Robert's accounts after he passed. Mrs. Carter, it's good to hear from you, she said warmly. How can I help you today? I took a deep breath. I need to talk to someone about protecting my accounts. I have reason to believe my family members may try to access my funds without permission. There was a pause. I see. Can you come in today? This is something we should handle in person. 2 hours later, I was sitting in Mrs. Chen's office, feeling more in control than I had in months. She listened carefully as I explained my situation, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions. "The good news," she said when I finished, "is that your accounts are only in your name. They can't access them without your explicit permission or a court order. But I'm going to add some additional security measures." She set up verbal passwords on my accounts, removed my address from any mailed statements, and put a flag in my file about potential financial exploitation. She also introduced me to their Elder Financial Protection Program, something I'd never known existed. If anyone calls claiming to represent you or asking about your accounts, we'll require them to come in person with proper identification and documentation, she explained. And if anyone tries to pressure you into making large withdrawals or transfers, we'll ask you to wait 24 hours and speak with one of our protection specialists. Before I left, Mrs. Chen gave me something I hadn't expected: validation. "Mrs. Carter, in 20 years of banking, I've seen this situation more times than I care to count. What you're describing is textbook financial elder abuse, and it's almost always perpetrated by family members. The fact that you recognized it and took action puts you ahead of many victims who never get help." Victims. There was that word again. But somehow, sitting in that bank office taking concrete steps to protect myself, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. My phone rang as I was driving home. "James again." "Hey, beautiful," he said, his voice as smooth as ever. "Just checking in. How are you feeling about everything we discussed yesterday?" "Oh, I said, letting my voice sound tired and confused. "It's all so much to think about. My head feels so fuzzy these days." "That's exactly why we're worried about you, sweetheart. Listen, Marcus wants to set up that appointment with his attorney friend. Would Friday morning work for you?" "Friday? Tomorrow?" They weren't wasting any time. "I suppose so," I said hesitantly. "What kind of appointment is it exactly?" "Just a consultation. To review your will, maybe set up some powers of attorney so we can help you if you need it. Nothing complicated." Powers of attorney. My blood ran cold. Patricia had specifically warned me about this. Once someone had power of attorney over my finances, they could do whatever they wanted with my money. "That sounds overwhelming," I said. "Not at all," James assured me. "We'll be there with you. Marcus and David and me. We'll handle everything. All you have to do is sign a few papers. Sign a few papers." Just like that, they'd have legal control over everything Robert had worked for, everything I had left. "Okay," I said, because I knew they expected me to agree. "What time?" 10 o'clock. "Marcus will pick you up at 9:30. After we hung up, I immediately called the number Patricia had given me for the legal advocate. Unfortunately, I got voicemail, but I left a detailed message about the attorney appointment and asked for an urgent callback. Then I called Alina. "Mrs. Carter, I was hoping to hear from you. How are things going?" I told her about my morning, the bank visit, the call to Adult Protective Services, and James's news about the attorney appointment. "Absolutely do not sign anything tomorrow," Elena said firmly. "I don't care what they tell you, what pressure they apply, what excuses they make. Do not sign a single document. But what if I seem too suspicious? What if they realize I know what they're planning? Then you leave," she said simply. "You get up and walk out. Call me, call Patricia, call 911 if you have to, but do not let them bully you into signing away your rights." We talked for another 20 minutes, and Elena helped me develop what she called an exit strategy. If I felt uncomfortable or pressured during the appointment, I would excuse myself to use the restroom and call her from there. She would be standing by with her phone, ready to help me leave if necessary. "Mrs. Carter," she said before we hung up, "I want you to remember something. You raised me to be strong, to stand up for myself, to never let anyone make me feel small. Now it's time for you to follow your own advice." I'd raised her to be strong. In all the years since Elena had been my student, I'd never thought about the lessons I'd taught her, but she was right. I had encouraged her to find her voice, to believe in herself, to never accept less than she deserved. When had I stopped following that advice myself? That evening, I sat down with my notebook and wrote out everything I wanted to say to my brothers. All the anger, hurt, and disappointment I'd been swallowing for years. I wrote about the money they'd taken, the trust they'd betrayed, the way they'd manipulated my grief for their own gain. Then I tore the pages out and burned them in my kitchen sink. I wasn't ready for that conversation yet, but someday I would be. Instead, I wrote a different kind of letter, one I actually intended to send. It was addressed to my cousin Linda in Nashville, Robert's sister who'd always been kind to me, but whom I'd lost touch with after the funeral. In the letter, I explained what was happening and asked if I could visit her for a few days if things got difficult. I sealed the envelope and put it on my hall table, ready to mail the next day. Just having an escape plan made me feel more in control. My phone rang one more time that night. Marcus. Sarah, James told me about tomorrow's appointment. I want you to know how proud I am of you for taking this step. Proud of me for walking into their trap. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so infuriating. I'm nervous about it, I said honestly. That's natural. But this is the responsible thing to do. You're making sure your affairs are in order while you still can. That shows wisdom. While I still can. As if my mental decline was inevitable, already in progress. Will it hurt? I asked, playing up the confusion they expected. Hurt, Sarah, it's just paperwork. You won't feel a thing. But I would feel it. Every signature would be a piece of my independence, my dignity, my future signed away. Every document would be another step toward the helpless, controlled existence they had planned for me. I should go to bed, I said. Big day tomorrow. Yes, it is. Marcus agreed. This is the beginning of a new chapter for you, Sarah. A better one. He was right about that, though not in the way he meant. Tomorrow would be the beginning of a new chapter, the one where I stopped being a victim and started fighting back. I spent the last hour before bed reviewing everything Elena and Patricia had told me, practicing phrases I might need. I need to think about this. I'd like my own attorney to review this first. I'm not comfortable signing anything today. Simple words, but they felt like armor. For the first time since Robert died, I fell asleep feeling ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. I just hoped I was strong enough to follow through when the moment came. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. I'd been awake since 5, my stomach churning with anxiety about the attorney meeting. I dressed carefully, my navy blue suit, the one I'd worn to parent conferences for years. It made me feel more like the confident teacher I used to be and less like the confused widow my brothers expected. At exactly 9:30, Marcus pulled into my driveway. I watched from my window as he sat in his BMW for a moment, checking his phone. Even from a distance, I could see the self-satisfied expression on his face. He thought he was about to win the game. I tucked my phone into my purse, making sure Elena's number was easily accessible, and grabbed my small notebook. If they asked about it, I'd say I was having trouble remembering things and needed to write stuff down. They'd believe that. It fit their narrative perfectly. Ready for your big day? Marcus asked when I got into his car. He was wearing his most expensive suit, the charcoal gray one that probably cost more than my monthly pension. I think so, I said, letting my voice quaver slightly. I'm just nervous about all the legal stuff. It's so complicated. That's why you have us, he said, patting my hand in a way that was probably meant to be reassuring but felt patronizing. We'll make sure everything is taken care of properly. The law office was in downtown Memphis, in one of those gleaming high-rises that made me feel small just looking at them. Marcus guided me through the marble lobby like I might get lost, his hand on my elbow in a grip that was just a little too tight. David and James were already waiting in the reception area. David looked uncomfortable in his ill-fitting suit, while James was his usual charming self, flashing smiles at the receptionist who seemed completely taken with him. There she is, James said, standing to hug me. How are you feeling, sweetheart? A little overwhelmed, I admitted, which was the absolute truth. The attorney, Gerald Hoffman, was exactly what I'd expected. Mid-50s, expensive suit, the kind of handshake that was meant to intimidate. His office was all dark wood and leather, designed to impress and perhaps make elderly clients feel out of their depth. Mrs. Carter, he said as we all settled into chairs around his conference table. Your brothers have explained your situation. I understand you're interested in updating your estate planning documents and perhaps establishing some powers of attorney. I suppose so, I said hesitantly. I'm not really sure what I need. Marcus leaned forward. What we discussed, Sarah, is making sure your affairs are in order, given your current challenges with memory and decision-making. There it was, the first direct attack on my competency, delivered with a concerned smile. Mr. Hoffman nodded sympathetically. Of course, it's very wise to plan ahead. Now, I've prepared several documents based on our preliminary conversation. He slid a thick folder across the table to me. These include an updated will, a financial power of attorney, and a healthcare directive. I opened the folder with shaking hands, though the shaking was more from anger than fear. The documents were dense with legal language, but I could make out enough to understand what they meant. The power of attorney gave Marcus complete control over my finances, effective immediately. The healthcare directive gave James the right to make all medical decisions for me. The will. I had to read that section twice to believe it. The will left everything to my 3 brothers in equal shares, with a provision stating that this reflected my clear intent to ensure my estate benefits those who provided care and guidance during my declining years. Declining years. I was 67 years old, not 97. This seems like a lot, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's really quite standard, Mr. Hoffman assured me. Your brothers explained that you've been having some difficulties managing your affairs lately. These documents will ensure that people you trust can help you when needed. When needed. Not if needed, when needed. As if my incompetence was already a foregone conclusion. What exactly would this mean? I asked, pointing to the power of attorney document. It would allow Marcus to handle your financial affairs, Mr. Hoffman explained. Pay your bills, manage your investments, make decisions about your living situation. It would take a lot of pressure off you. And this one. I pointed to the healthcare directive. That gives James the authority to make medical decisions if you're unable to do so yourself, he said. Very important to have, especially as we age. I looked around the table at my 3 brothers. Marcus was checking his watch, clearly eager to get this over with. David was staring out the window, probably thinking about how he'd spend his share of my estate. James was watching me with that sympathetic expression he'd perfected over the years. I need to think about this, I said finally. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sarah, Marcus said, his voice taking on an edge, we've been through this. You agreed that this was the responsible thing to do. I know, but seeing it all written out like this, it's just a lot to process. Miss Carter, Mr. Hoffman said smoothly, I understand this feels overwhelming. But your brothers have your best interests at heart. They're the ones who'll be caring for you as your situation progresses. As my situation progresses, they were all so certain that I was deteriorating, that I needed to be managed and controlled. What if I want to wait? I asked. What if I want my own attorney to look at these first? I might as well have announced that I was planning to rob a bank. The silence was deafening. Your own attorney. Marcus repeated, his mask of concern slipping just slightly. Sarah, Mr. Hoffman is one of the best estate attorneys in Memphis. What could another lawyer tell you that he can't? I just think. Robert always said important decisions shouldn't be rushed. Robert's not here anymore, David said bluntly, speaking for the first time since we'd sat down. And frankly, Sarah, you're not the same person you were when Robert was alive. We've all noticed the changes. There it was. The direct attack I'd been expecting. Changes, I repeated. The forgetfulness, James said gently, playing good cop to David's bad cop. The confusion about finances. The way you repeat yourself in conversations. We're worried about you, and these documents are just a way to make sure you're protected. Protected? From whom? From making my own decisions. From living my own life. I thought about Alina's words, remember who you are. Remember that you taught me to be strong. I need to use the restroom, I said, standing abruptly. Of course, Mr. Hoffman said. Down the hall, second door on your right. I walked out of that office on unsteady legs, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. In the bathroom, I locked the door and immediately called Elena. Mrs. Carter, are you okay? I'm in the attorney's office, I whispered. Elena, they want me to sign over everything. Power of attorney, medical decisions, even my will. They're saying I'm incompetent, that I need protection. Okay, take a deep breath. Are you safe right now? Yes, I'm in the bathroom. But they're pressuring me to sign today. Listen to me carefully. Elena said, her voice firm and reassuring. You do not have to sign anything. You can walk out of there right now if you want to. But what do I say? How do I explain? You don't owe them an explanation. You're a competent adult who has every right to seek independent legal advice before making major decisions about your estate. If they can't accept that, then they're showing their true colors. She was right. I was letting them make me feel guilty for wanting to protect myself. Mrs. Carter, are you still there? Yes, I'm here. Do you want me to come get you? I can be there in 20 minutes. The offer was tempting, but I knew I needed to face this myself. Running away would only convince them that I really was incompetent. No, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I can handle this. I know you can. Call me when you're done, okay? I hung up and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. My hair was still neat, my lipstick wasn't smudged, my hands had stopped shaking. I looked like exactly what I was. A competent woman who wasn't going to be bullied into signing her life away. When I walked back into the conference room, 4 pairs of eyes immediately focused on me. Feeling better? James asked.
Actually, yes.
I said, sitting down with more confidence than I'd felt all morning. I've made a decision. Wonderful, Mr. Hoffman said, pulling out his pen. Shall we start with the power of attorney? No, I said clearly. I've decided I want to have these documents reviewed by an independent attorney before I sign anything. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Sarah, Marcus said slowly, we've been through this, Mr. Hoffman is perfectly qualified. I'm sure he is, I interrupted, surprised by my own boldness. But this is my estate, my life, my decision, and I want a second opinion. This is ridiculous, David muttered. You're just being paranoid. Maybe I am, I said, meeting his eyes directly. But it's my right to be paranoid about my own affairs. Mr. Hoffman cleared his throat. Mrs. Carter, I understand your hesitation, but your brothers have expressed some concerns about your decision-making capabilities lately. Perhaps it would be best to handle this while you're still able to make clear judgments. While I'm still able. There it was again. The assumption that my mental decline was inevitable and imminent. Mr. Hoffman, I said, standing up, I'm making a perfectly clear judgment right now. I'm not signing these documents today. Marcus stood up too, his face flushed with anger. Sarah, you're being unreasonable. We're trying to help you. Then you'll understand why I want to make sure I'm making the right decision, I said calmly. This is what happens, David said, gesturing at me like I wasn't even there. This is exactly the kind of irrational behavior we've been talking about. Irrational. Because wanting independent legal advice was irrational. Because protecting my own interests was unreasonable. I'm leaving now, I announced, picking up my purse. How are you getting home? Marcus demanded. I drove you here. I'll call a taxi, I said, though I had no idea how much that would cost or even how to call one. Sarah, don't be ridiculous, James said, his charm finally showing cracks. Just sign the papers and we can all go home. No? That single word hung in the air like a challenge. For the first time in 3 years, maybe for the first time in my entire relationship with my brothers, I had said no without apologizing, without explaining, without backing down. Fine, Marcus said coldly. But don't come crying to us when you've made a mess of things you can't clean up. I won't, I said, and walked out of the office. In the elevator, my knees finally gave out and I had to lean against the wall for support. But I'd done it. I'd stood up to them. I'd said no. In the lobby, I called Alina back. I didn't sign anything. I told her as soon as she answered. I'm so proud of you, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. How do you feel? I thought about it for a moment. Terrified, I said honestly. But also, free. That's exactly how you should feel. You just took control of your own life, Mrs. Carter. That's not something to be scared of. That's something to celebrate. She helped me figure out how to call a taxi using my phone, and 20 minutes later I was riding home through the streets of Memphis, watching the city pass by through rain-streaked windows. For the first time in 3 years, I had no idea what came next. But for the first time in 3 years, that felt like a good thing. I had said no, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning. The taxi dropped me off at my front door, and for a moment I just stood there in the drizzle, looking at my house like I was seeing it for the first time. It looked smaller somehow, but also more precious. This was mine. My home, my sanctuary, my choice to keep or leave when I was ready. Inside, I made myself a cup of tea with hands that were steadier than they'd been all morning. I'd done it. I'd actually stood up to them. The thought kept cycling through my mind, bringing with it waves of pride, terror, and something I hadn't felt in years, hope. But I wasn't naive enough to think it was over. If anything, I'd probably just made things worse for myself. My brothers weren't the type to accept defeat gracefully, and now they knew I wasn't the compliant, confused woman they'd thought I was. I was right. The phone started ringing at noon. James first, his voice tight with forced cheerfulness. Sarah, sweetheart, I hope you're feeling better. You seemed a little overwhelmed this morning. I'm fine, James. Good, good. Listen, I've been thinking about what happened today, and I'm wondering if maybe you misunderstood what those documents were for. Maybe we should sit down together, just you and me, and go over them again. I almost admired the strategy. Send in the charming one to smooth things over, make me think I'd overreacted, get me back under their control. I understood them perfectly, I said. I just want my own lawyer to review them first. There was a pause. Sarah, getting another lawyer involved is just going to complicate things unnecessarily. And it's expensive. Do you really want to spend money you don't have on something that's just meant to help you? Money I don't have, because of the $40,000 I'd given them over the years. I can afford it, I said simply. Can you, though? Your finances are already stretched thin. Maybe this isn't the time to be making impulsive decisions about spending. Impulsive decisions, like lending them money whenever they called with an emergency, like co-signing loans that were never repaid, like trusting them with my vulnerability after Robert died. James, I need to go. I have things to do. Wet. Sarah, I hung up. For the first time in my life, I hung up on one of my brothers and it felt surprisingly good. The phone rang again immediately. David this time. Sarah, what the hell was that about today? No pretense of charm or concern from him. Just anger. It was about me taking time to think about important decisions, I said. Important decisions. Sarah, you can barely remember what day it is half the time. You think you're qualified to make important decisions about complex legal documents. The cruelty in his voice took my breath away. David. No, let me finish. Marcus and James are trying to be nice about this, but I'm going to be honest with you. You're not the same person you were when Robert was alive. You're confused, you're forgetful, and you're making bad choices. We're trying to help you before you do something really stupid. Like what? Like trusting some stranger lawyer over your own family, like wasting money you can't afford on unnecessary legal fees. Like thinking you can handle things you clearly can't handle anymore. Each word was designed to wound, to make me doubt myself, to put me back in the box they'd built for me. I'm handling this conversation just fine, I said. Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're being stubborn and paranoid for no good reason. Then maybe you should stop sitting there, I said, and hung up on him too. My hands were shaking again, but not from fear this time, from fury. The mask was completely off now, no more pretense of loving concern or gentle guidance. They were angry that their plan had hit a snag, and they weren't bothering to hide it anymore. The phone rang a third time. Marcus, Sarah, his voice was ice cold. I think we need to have a serious conversation. I think we just did, at the lawyer's office. No, what happened at the lawyer's office was you having some kind of episode. I'm talking about a real conversation about your future. An episode, like I was a psychiatric patient having a breakdown. Marcus, I made a perfectly rational decision to seek independent legal advice. That's not an episode. Is it rational though? Sarah, I've been patient with you because I understand you're grieving, but there's a point where grief becomes something else. Something that requires intervention. Intervention. The word sent a chill down my spine. I'd heard enough true crime shows to know what family interventions could lead to. Involuntary commitments, guardianship proceedings, complete loss of autonomy. What kind of intervention? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The kind that protects you from making decisions that could harm you. Sarah, if you continue down this path, refusing help, acting paranoid, making irrational choices, we might have to explore other options. Other options. Like having me declared mentally incompetent in court. Like taking away my right to make my own decisions whether I agreed or not. Are you threatening me, Marcus? I'm trying to help you, but if you won't accept help voluntarily. He let the sentence hang in the air like a sword. Then what? You'll force it on me. We'll do whatever we have to do to protect you, Sarah. Even if it's from yourself. The line went dead, and I sat there staring at my phone, my heart racing. They weren't just angry, they were escalating. The gentle manipulation was over. Now came the real threats. I immediately called Patricia at Adult Protective Services. Mrs. Carter, I was hoping to hear from you. How did the attorney meeting go? I told her everything, the documents, the confrontation, the phone calls afterward. Mrs. Carter, what you're describing sounds like they're preparing to pursue guardianship proceedings. That's when family members petition the court to have someone declared incompetent and assign them a legal guardian. Can they do that? They can try. But the good news is that you'd have the right to contest it, to have your own attorney, to be evaluated by independent medical professionals. The bad news is that the process can be expensive and emotionally devastating, even if you win. What should I do? First, document everything. Every conversation, every threat, every attempt to pressure you. Second, get that independent attorney you mentioned as soon as possible. Third, consider having yourself evaluated by a psychologist or psychiatrist to establish your mental competency on the record. You mean prove that I'm not crazy? Essentially, yes. If they're going to claim you're incompetent, we want medical evidence that you're not. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen trying to process what my life had become. 3 hours ago, I'd been worried about signing some legal documents. Now I was facing the possibility of losing my legal rights entirely. But I wasn't the same frightened woman who discovered that recording just a few days ago. I was angry now, and anger was so much more useful than fear. I made a list of things I needed to do: find an attorney, schedule a psychological evaluation, document the threat, secure my finances further. But first, I needed to make sure I wasn't completely alone in this fight. I called Elena and told her about the morning's events and the threatening phone calls. Measures. Carter, I think it's time to consider filing for a restraining order. Against my own brothers. Against 3 men who are threatening to have you declared incompetent and take away your rights. The fact that they're related to you doesn't give them the right to abuse you. She was right, but the idea of getting the courts involved, of making this fight public, felt overwhelming. I need to think about it, I said. That's fine, but promise me something. If they show up at your house, if they try to intimidate you in person, you'll call the police. Elena, I can't call the police on my brothers. Yes, you can. And you will if you have to. Mrs. Carter, what they're doing is called coercive control. It's a form of domestic abuse, and it escalates. Please promise me. I promised, though I couldn't imagine actually following through. After we hung up, I realized I was hungry. I hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. As I made myself a sandwich, I thought about something Elena had said earlier in the week. Don't let them isolate you. Stay connected with people who care about you. I pulled out my address book, dusty from years of neglect, and started making calls. First to my cousin Linda in Nashville, then to my old teaching friend Beth, then to 3 other former colleagues I'd lost touch with. One by one, I reached out to people I'd allowed to drift away during my years of grief and isolation. The conversations were awkward at first. I had to explain why I'd been so distant, why I was calling now. But as I told them about my situation, something amazing happened. They rallied around me. Linda immediately invited me to come stay with her if I needed to. Beth offered to drive down from Jackson to be with me. My former principal, Mrs. Anderson, gave me the name of her attorney and insisted on paying for the consultation. My colleague from across the hall, Margaret, reminded me of something I'd forgotten. I had a teachers' union retirement fund that my brothers didn't even know about. By evening, I had a support network I'd forgotten existed and resources I didn't know I had. That night, as I got ready for bed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years. I felt like Sarah Carter again. Not the confused widow, not the vulnerable victim, but the woman who'd managed 25 third graders every year for 35 years. The woman who'd stood up to difficult parents, demanding administrators and budget cuts. The woman who'd never backed down from a fight when it mattered. My brothers had made a serious miscalculation. They'd assumed that grief had broken me permanently, that isolation had made me weak, that their manipulation had destroyed my sense of self. They were about to learn how wrong they were. As I turned off my bedside lamp, I heard a car pull into my driveway. My heart jumped, but I forced myself to stay calm as I looked out my bedroom window. Marcus's BMW sat in my driveway, engine running. He was on his phone, gesturing angrily as he talked. After a few minutes, he hung up and just sat there, staring at my house. I picked up my phone and dialed 911, but didn't hit send. Not yet. Elena's words echoed in my mind. If they try to intimidate you in person, you'll call the police. Was this intimidation? Sitting in my driveway at 10 o'clock at night after threatening me on the phone? I thought it probably was. Marcus sat there for another 5 minutes, then started his engine and drove away. But the message was clear. They knew where I lived, they could show up whenever they wanted, and they weren't giving up. That was fine. Neither was I. I set my phone on my nightstand with Elena's number ready to call, and for the first time since Robert died, I slept the sleep of someone who was ready to fight for her life. Saturday morning brought sunshine for the first time in days, and I took it as a good omen. I was up early, coffee in hand, calling the attorney Mrs. Anderson had recommended. Janet Morrison specialized in elder law and had Saturday morning appointments available for emergencies. Mrs. Carter, she said when I explained my situation over the phone. What you're describing is unfortunately common, but it's also completely unacceptable. Can you be in my office at 10? At exactly 10 o'clock, I was sitting in Janet Morrison's office, feeling more hopeful than I had in days. She was nothing like the intimidating Mr. Hoffman, mid-40s, wearing a simple blue dress, with kind eyes that reminded me of Elena's. Her office felt warm and welcoming, with family photos on her desk and diplomas that spoke of real expertise in protecting elderly clients. Let me make sure I understand, she said after I'd told her the whole story. Your brothers have been systematically depleting your assets for 3 years under the guise of helping with emergencies. They've now attempted to pressure you into signing over complete control of your finances and healthcare decisions. And when you refused, they threatened to have you declared incompetent. That's right. And you have a recording of them discussing plans to steal your assets and have you committed. I pulled out my phone and played the damning recording. Janet listened intently, taking notes, her expression growing more serious with each word. Mrs. Carter, this recording is evidence of conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse and potentially criminal fraud. Have you shared this with Adult Protective Services? Yes, and I've been working with a caseworker named Patricia Williams. Good. Now, let me ask you some questions to assess your mental competency, since that's clearly going to be their line of attack. For the next 20 minutes, Janet asked me detailed questions about my finances, my medical history, current events, and my ability to make reasoned decisions. She had me solve simple math problems, recall information from earlier in our conversation, and explain my reasoning for various choices I'd made. Mrs. Carter, she said when we finished, you are clearly competent to make your own decisions. In fact, you're more financially aware than many clients half your age. What your brothers are doing is not about your mental capacity, it's about their greed. The relief I felt hearing those words was overwhelming. For months, they'd made me question my own mind, my own judgment. Having a legal professional confirm that I was thinking clearly felt like being handed back my identity. What can we do about it? Several things. First, I'm going to draft a comprehensive estate plan that reflects your actual wishes, not theirs. Second, I'm going to prepare documentation establishing your mental competency. Third, I'm going to send them a cease and desist letter making it clear that any further harassment or attempts to coerce you will result in legal action. What about the guardianship threat? If they try to pursue that, we'll fight it. But honestly, based on what you've told me and what I've observed today, I don't think any judge would find you incompetent. The real question is whether they'll actually follow through on the threat, or if they're just trying to scare you into compliance. We spent another hour going over my assets, my wishes for my estate, and my concerns about my brother's behavior. Janet explained my rights, the legal protections available to me, and what to expect if things escalated further. One more thing, she said as our meeting wrapped up. I want you to consider filing for a restraining order. Showing up at your house at night after making threats is intimidating behavior, and it could escalate. I keep hearing that from everyone, I admitted. Because everyone is right. Mrs. Carter, in 30 years of practice, I've learned that family members who are willing to financially abuse and threaten elderly relatives don't usually stop at verbal threats. They escalate because they feel entitled to what they want. Before I left, Janet gave me a packet of information about elder abuse, legal resources, and emergency contacts. She also gave me something invaluable, confidence. Mrs. Carter, she said as I was leaving, you've done nothing wrong here. You're not paranoid, you're not incompetent, and you're not overreacting. You're a woman protecting herself from people who want to exploit her. Never apologize for that. I drove home feeling like I could take on the world. But as I turned onto my street, that confidence wavered. David's pickup truck was parked in my driveway, and he was sitting on my front porch steps like he owned the place. I considered driving past, calling the police, calling Alina. But then I remembered Janet's words, you've done nothing wrong here. This was my house, my porch, my life. I wasn't going to be driven away from my own home. I parked in my driveway and got out of my car, my heart pounding but my head held high. Hello, David, where have you been? He demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. That's none of your business. He stood up, and I was reminded of how tall he was, how he could use his size to intimidate. But I'd spent 35 years dealing with intimidating people. Some of them were 6 feet tall and some of them were 8 years old. But the principle was the same. You never showed fear. It is my business when my sister is running around town making a fool of herself, he said. How am I making a fool of myself? By hiring some lawyer to fight your own family, by acting like we're trying to hurt you when we're trying to help you. Help me by taking control of my finances and medical decisions. Help me by putting me in a nursing home so you can sell my house. His face flushed red. One never said anything about selling your house. Didn't you? I pulled out my phone and played part of the recording. David's voice filled the air, the house, the insurance money, all of it. The color drained from his face. Where did you get that? You called me by accident. Left me a lovely voicemail of you 3 planning to steal everything I have. That's not what we were doing. That's exactly what you were doing, David. And now you're angry because I'm not going to let you do it. He stepped closer to me, his voice dropping to something more dangerous. Sarah, you need to be very careful here. You're making enemies of people who have always been on your side. have you been on my side when you borrowed $5,000 for your medical emergency and spent it on a motorcycle? When Marcus convinced me to sign that loan for James's restaurant? When all three of you sat in that lawyer's office yesterday trying to trick me into signing my life away? We were trying to help you before you completely lose your mind. My mind is fine, David. I had it evaluated this morning. That stopped him cold. What do you mean, evaluated? I mean, a licensed attorney specializing in elder law spent 2 hours confirming that I am completely competent to make my own decisions. So if you try to have me declared incompetent, I'll have professional testimony that you're lying. David stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him recalculating. This wasn't the confused, grieving woman he'd expected to intimidate. You're making a mistake, Sarah, he said finally. A big one. We're your family. We're all you have left. No, I said quietly. You're not all I have left. And you're not my family, not anymore. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't lie to each other. Family doesn't threaten each other. You'll regret this, he said, walking toward his truck. When you're sitting alone in this house with no one to help you, you'll regret pushing us away. I'm already alone, David. I've been alone for 3 years while you three picked my bones clean. The only difference now is that I'm not pretending otherwise. He slammed his truck door and peeled out of my driveway, leaving rubber marks on the asphalt. I stood there watching him go, my legs shaking but my resolve stronger than ever. Inside, I made myself lunch and called Elena to tell her about the morning's events. Mrs. Carter, I'm so proud of you. You stood up to him beautifully. I was terrified, I admitted. But you did it anyway. That's what courage is. Being scared but doing the right thing anyway. Elena helped me document the confrontation with David, adding it to the growing file of evidence against my brothers. She also convinced me that it was time to file the restraining order. They're escalating, she said. Showing up at your house, confronting you in person, making threats. This isn't going to stop on its own. That afternoon, I drove to the courthouse with Elena by my side. Filing for a restraining order against my own brothers felt surreal, like crossing a line I could never uncross. But as I filled out the paperwork describing their threats and intimidating behavior, I realized I wasn't crossing a line. I was drawing one. The judge who reviewed my petition was a woman about my age, with silver hair and kind eyes. She read through my documentation carefully, listened to parts of the recording, and asked thoughtful questions about my situation. Mrs. Carter, she said finally, I'm granting a temporary restraining order against all 3 respondents. They are prohibited from contacting you, coming to your residence, or attempting to intimidate or coerce you in any way. We'll have a full hearing in 2 weeks to determine if this should be made permanent. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in months. For the first time since Robert died, I had legal protection. I had an attorney fighting for me. I had friends supporting me. I had documented proof of my competency. Most importantly, I had my voice back. That evening, I called my cousin Linda in Nashville. Sarah, she said warmly. I was just thinking about you. How are things going? Better, I said. Much better. But Linda, I need to ask you something. If things get complicated here, could I come visit you for a while? Of course you can. You can stay as long as you want. What's happening? I told her about the restraining order, about standing up to my brothers, about finally fighting back after years of being their victim. Good for you, Linda said fiercely. Robert would be so proud of you, Sarah. He always said you were the strongest woman he knew, even when you didn't believe it yourself. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet kitchen, looking at the photo of my 3rd grade class that I'd put on the refrigerator. 22 little faces looking up at me with trust and admiration. For 35 years, children had counted on me to protect them, to teach them, to help them find their voices. It was time I did the same thing for myself. My phone buzzed with a text message. Marcus, we know what you did today. This isn't over. I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, you're right. It's not over. It's just beginning. Then I blocked his number and David's and James's. For the first time in 3 years, my phone was silent, and for the first time in 3 years, that silence felt like peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, I was sure. But tonight, I was going to enjoy the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd stopped running and started fighting, and I was going to win. 2 weeks later, I walked into that same courtroom wearing my best dress, the burgundy one Robert had always loved, and carrying a folder thick with documentation. Janet Morrison sat beside me at the petitioner's table, calm and confident. Across the aisle, my 3 brothers sat with their attorney, a nervous-looking young man who kept shuffling through papers. The past 2 weeks had been the most peaceful I'd experienced in 3 years. No threatening phone calls, no unexpected visits, no pressure to make decisions I wasn't ready for. The restraining order had given me something I'd forgotten: I could have the right to live my life without fear. But more than that, those 2 weeks had given me time to reconnect with who I really was. I'd had lunch with Alina twice, dinner with my old teaching colleagues, and long phone conversations with Linda every evening. I'd started going to the senior center downtown, not because I needed supervision, but because I enjoyed the company. I'd even joined their book club and discovered I still had opinions about literature that had nothing to do with what anyone else expected me to think. Most surprisingly, I'd started volunteering with Adult Protective Services, sharing my story with other elderly people who suspected they were being abused by family members. Patricia Williams had suggested it, and I'd found a purpose I hadn't known I was looking for. Mrs. Carter. The judge called, and I stood up to give my testimony. For 20 minutes, I told my story to a packed courtroom. I described years of financial manipulation, the systematic erosion of my confidence, the threats and intimidation when I finally stood up for myself. I played the recording that had started my awakening, watching the judge's expression grow more serious with each word. When I finished, the judge asked, "Mrs. Carter, what outcome are you seeking today?" "Your Honor, I want the restraining order made permanent. I want legal protection from people who have shown they believe they have the right to control my life, spend my money, and threaten my autonomy. I want the right to live as a competent adult without fear of retaliation." My brother's attorney then called Marcus to testify, and I watched my eldest brother take the stand with his usual confidence. But as Janet Morrison Cross examined him, that confidence began to crumble. "Mr. Carter, you stated that you were concerned about your sister's mental capacity. Can you tell us about your professional qualifications to make such an assessment?" "I don't need professional qualifications to see that my sister has been confused and forgetful." "Have you consulted with any medical professionals about these concerns?" "Well, no, but have you suggested that she see a doctor for evaluation?" "We were handling it as a family matter." "By handling it, do you mean by preparing legal documents that would give you complete control over her finances and medical decisions?" Marcus's face was getting red. "We were trying to help her." Janet played the recording then, and I watched my brothers' faces as their own voices filled the courtroom, casually discussing how to steal my assets and have me committed. "Mr. Carter, is this your voice saying, once we get her into one of those places we can handle everything else, the house, the insurance money, all of it?" That conversation was taken out of context. What context makes planning to steal your sister's assets acceptable, Mr. Carter? He had no answer for that. When David and James testified, Janet destroyed them just as efficiently. David's bitter resentment showed through every answer, making it clear his motivations had nothing to do with my welfare. James tried to charm the judge the way he'd charmed everyone his whole life, but his practiced sweetness sounded hollow in the face of the recorded evidence. After closing arguments, the judge retired to her chambers for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. When she returned, her expression was stern. "I've reviewed all the evidence presented today, including the recordings, financial documentation, and testimony from both sides. What I see here is a clear pattern of financial exploitation and emotional abuse perpetrated by family members against an elderly woman." She looked directly at my brothers. The respondents appear to believe that their sister's grief following her husband's death somehow gave them the right to control her life and finances. They were mistaken. "Mrs. Carter has been evaluated by multiple professionals and found to be completely competent to make her own decisions." Then she looked at me. "Mrs. Carter, I'm making this restraining order permanent. The respondents are prohibited from contacting you, coming to your property, or attempting to interfere with your legal or financial affairs. If they violate this order, they will face criminal charges." I felt Janet squeeze my hand under the table, but I kept my eyes on the judge. "Furthermore," she continued, "I'm ordering that all financial transactions between Mrs. Carter and the respondents over the past 5 years be reviewed by the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges of elder financial abuse." The courtroom was dead silent. Even I hadn't expected that. As we filed out of the courtroom, Marcus tried to approach me in the hallway. "Sarah, please, we need to talk." "No contact means no contact, Mr. Carter," Janet said firmly, stepping between us. "Any further attempt to communicate with my client will result in criminal charges." I looked at Marcus, really looked at him, for what I knew would be the last time. The polished businessman fuckhead was gone. He looked older, smaller, defeated. For just a moment, I saw the boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms when he was scared. But that boy had grown into a man who tried to steal from his sister, and I couldn't save him from the consequences of that choice. "Goodbye, Marcus," I said quietly, then walked away. Outside the courthouse, Elena was waiting with flowers and a huge smile. "How does it feel to be free?" she asked, hugging me tight. "Strange," I admitted. "I keep expecting the phone to ring, or someone to show up at my house demanding something." "It'll take time to adjust," Janet said. "But Mrs. Carter, you should know that what you did in there, standing up to family members, fighting back against people who had power over you, that takes extraordinary courage. I've seen grown men crumble under less pressure than you've faced these past few weeks." That evening, I invited Alina, Linda's, who'd driven down from Nashville for the hearing, and 3 of my old teaching colleagues over for dinner. We sat around my kitchen table, the same table where I'd sat alone just a month ago, trying to make sense of bank statements, while my brothers plotted against me and celebrated. "So what's next for you?" Linda asked as we shared dessert. "I'm not sure," I said honestly. "For 3 years, I've been so focused on just getting through each day that I forgot I could have plans, dreams, goals." "You've got time to figure it out," Elena said. "You're only 67. You could have another 20 or 30 years to do whatever you want." 20 or 30 years. The thought was exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. Over the next few months, I did figure it out piece by piece. I started teaching literacy classes at the senior center, rediscovering the joy I'd found in education. I joined a support group for people who'd experienced elder abuse, eventually becoming a group facilitator. I traveled to Nashville to spend a month with Linda, then came home and planned a trip to Ireland, something Robert and I had always talked about doing but never quite managed. Most importantly, I learned to trust myself again. 6 months after the court hearing, I was in my garden planting spring flowers when Elena stopped by with news. "Mrs. Carter, I thought you'd want to know. Marcus, David, and James have all been indicted on charges of elder financial abuse and conspiracy to commit fraud." I sat back on my heels, pulling off my gardening gloves. "How do you feel about that?" I thought about it for a moment. "Sad," I said finally, "but not guilty. I didn't put them in this situation. They put themselves here by their choices. I just refuse to be their victim anymore." Alina nodded. "The prosecutor wants to know if you'd be willing to testify if the case goes to trial." "Yes," I said without hesitation. "If it helps protect other people from going through what I went through, then yes." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table writing in a journal I'd started keeping. It wasn't the desperate documentation of abuse I'd done months earlier, but something else. Reflections on healing, on finding strength, on building a life worth living. I wrote about the woman I'd been before grief made me forget myself, confident, capable, trusted with other people's children. I wrote about the woman I'd become during those dark 3 years, isolated, manipulated, convinced of my own inadequacy. And I wrote about the woman I was becoming now, stronger for having survived, wiser for having learned, more compassionate for having suffered. My phone rang, and for just a split second, that old anxiety fluttered through me, but then I saw Elena's name on the caller ID and smiled as I answered. "Mrs. Carter, I have someone I'd like you to talk to. Her name is Dorothy, she's 73, and her son and daughter-in-law have been pressuring her to sign over her house to them. She's scared and confused and doesn't know who to trust." "Of course," I said. "Give me her number." After we hung up, I looked around my kitchen in my house, surrounded by my things and my choices in my life. The photo of my 3rd grade class still smiled at me from the refrigerator, but now it was joined by pictures from my recent adventures, me and Linda at the Grand Ole Opry, me with my support group at our graduation ceremony, me standing in front of the cliffs of Moher in Ireland with my arms spread wide like I could embrace the whole world. Tomorrow I would call Dorothy and share my story, offer my support, remind her that she was stronger than she knew. Next week I would testify at a legislative hearing about strengthening elder abuse protections. Next month I would start training to become a certified victim advocate. I had found my purpose again, but more than that, I had found myself. Not the woman I'd been before Robert died, but someone new. Someone forged in the fire of betrayal and manipulation and trauma, but not broken by it. Someone who knew what it felt like to lose everything and fight to get it back. As I got ready for bed, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The face looking back at me had more lines than it used to, more gray in the hair, but there was something in the eyes that hadn't been there for years. Peace. Strength. Hope. My brothers had tried to steal my money, my home, my autonomy, my dignity. They'd succeeded with the money. Some of it, anyway, but they'd failed at everything else. In trying to control me, they'd forced me to remember who I really was. In trying to make me weak, they'd made me strong. In trying to silence me, they'd given me a voice I'd never had before. I was Sarah Michelle Carter. I was a survivor. I was a fighter. I was a teacher, a friend, a woman who had learned that family isn't defined by blood, but by love, respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. And I was free. The next morning, I woke up to sunshine streaming through my bedroom windows and the sound of birds singing in the oak tree Robert had planted the year we moved in. I made my coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and opened my address book to look up Dorothy's number. Somewhere out there, a 73-year-old woman was sitting in her own kitchen, afraid and alone and convinced she had no choices left. I knew exactly how she felt. And I knew exactly how to help her remember that she was wrong, because that's what we do. Those of us who've been where she is and found our way back. We reach out our hands and say, you are not alone. You are stronger than you know. And your story isn't over yet. Mine certainly wasn't.